With more reactions out to Atlanta, Eamon Lynch and Rex Hoggard are standing by. Guys?
Thank you very much, Damon. You and I were sitting next to each other in that press conference. I think we had the same look on our face when Jay mentioned the idea of a positive outcome. And I think we had the same takeaway. What did you make of that?
Yeah, several times he used the phrase positive outcome for the PGA Tour. I think it's entirely uncertain if that positive outcome is necessarily the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia. Jay Monahan did emphasise that that is the only conversation he's currently involved in now. But anyone who's spending time around this game, as we are, Rex, knows that is not the only conversation that's going on around the outside of this game. And Jay did point out that the idea here is to create this new investment vehicle for the PGA Tour that will finance purses and whatever else going forward. But the idea that there's only one party that might be the investor in that, I think, was kind of laid to rest today. But there is definitely a drift in the PGA Tour community, certainly among players, that there also ought to be alternatives being interrogated out there. Jay said he's not part of those conversations right now. That doesn't mean those conversations aren't going to come at some point.
He went back to another line that I thought was fascinating as well, and it was, quote, "I see it," which means he sees this positive outcome. And I think you're 100% correct. I don't think that's necessarily a definitive agreement. Keep in mind, they have a deadline of the end of this year to come up with whatever that definitive agreement is going to look like. And also, it's worth keeping in mind, they have an investment firm that's part of these negotiations as we speak. They have someone who is a coordinator, let's call them, for the player, who is also an investment firm. So these are all things that are on the table now that they've made this move to NewCo. So it will be fascinating going forward exactly what that positive outcome is going to be. I will say this, though. The other part, and you asked about it, I thought it was a really good question. The idea of player empowerment. I don't think players have ever had this much power when it comes to the PGA Tour, certainly not the policy board.
Do you like him reminding you who he worked for?
Yes.
In there as well, he name-checked every player director who was on the board of the PGA Tour, including Tiger Woods, who was conscripted onto the board quite recently, and it still hasn't actually been spelled out how long Tiger's actually going to serve. It's clear on every other director how they get there, how long they serve. That's not at all clear with Tiger Woods right now. There has been a distinct shift in power from the executives on the PGA Tour to the players. I guess it's the whole difference, Rex, between is this a member-led organisation or a member input organisation? They've called themselves a member-led organisation for a long time. The reality is it was closer to member input. It's certainly a member-led organisation right now.
And when you look, just go back a little over a year ago, and the makeup of the PGA Tour Policy Board was there was 10 members on that board. Only 4 of them were players. So it gave you an idea. They always had the minority vote. They were never going to be able to walk into that room and decide exactly what the PGA Tour was going to vote on. In just a little over a year, that has swung 180%. I mean, 180 degrees. Now it's 6-4, going the other way. I also will say this, that it's just not the players having a voice on that board, but it's the players who are on the board. You pointed out Rory. You pointed out Tiger. Certainly Patrick Cantlay. All of these players have opinions, and they're clearly going to have a say whenever comes of this positive outcome.
They really are, and that to me is the lasting legacy of this whole year that we've gone through now, is that the players are going to dictate what the business of the PGA Tour is, and that can work pro and con. We'll find out how that works over the course of the next few years, because a lot of players on the board have business relationships with the PGA Tour. So it's very easy to say, okay, well, there are conflicts of interest here. Where are guidelines going to be drawn? It's an entirely new world that the PGA Tour has moved into, and it was striking the difference today's press conference, Rex, versus Jay Monahan here a year ago, where he was laying out what became known as the designated events, the increased purses, the subsidy for rookies coming onto the PGA Tour, the mandatory appearance of players at all of those events. A lot of that has changed now. It's not mandatory for the players anymore because they don't want to do it as mandatory anymore. The designated events have become signature events. Very little has actually remained the same since then, which is a sign of how quickly the sands have shifted in this conversation. But he definitely looked more confident a year ago than he looked this year to me.
I'll just go back 2 weeks. The commissioner met with a group of reporters. It wasn't on camera, just kind of a round table in Memphis. And I've always taken that Jay, he wins press conferences. He's very charismatic. He's very good at answering questions, even questions that he can't answer. He doesn't cut you off. He gives you an opportunity to understand where he's coming from. That wasn't the case 2 weeks ago. I think he was still finding his footing. I think there was still a little awkwardness from having taken that leave in a very, very important time for the PGA Tour. What I saw in there today was more of what we've come to expect from Jay Monahan. And he was confident. Again, he started his press conference with a 19-minute sort of speech talking about the health of the tour, the financial health of the tour, the competitive health of the tour. It seems to me he wanted to change the narrative.
He did, but there are still lingering questions that remain out there. I mean, Jay's been very explicit, as has the Tour in its public statements over the last few weeks and a couple of months since June 6th, is that we are a long way away from the framework agreement becoming a definitive agreement. If that's the case, why was it announced on June 6th? And that has never sort of been clearly laid out. Who benefited from any such timeline? And the other issue with Jay, I think, is he just doesn't seem to me like a man who feels as empowered as he was a year ago, because he has invested so much of the equity he built up over the years with players in this deal and pushing it through, as have a couple of board members, Jimmy Dunn and Ed Hurley, who negotiated the deal. If this deal doesn't pass muster with the board, and Jay said they are the ultimate voice on it, then it opens a whole new host of questions, not least the future of those gentlemen in question, but also of the business future of the PGA Tour itself.
You talk about the semantics of the board. Jay said 2 weeks ago in Memphis that whatever agreement they come up with to take to the board, they will have to unanimously approve it. Does he have that approval right now?
It's very clear that it's an open question right now. Tiger Woods had said that Jay had his confidence moving forward with the changes that he'd made when the players demanded more of a say. But it's very clear that the Tour has agreed that all major decisions are going to be approved by players. And not every player is aligned in terms of feeling that this framework agreement with the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia is the direction that they want to go. They may well be persuadable, but there are absolutely players who have a vote who are not persuaded of that right now.
And I think the important thing here is that Jay is trying to rebuild that trust. You talked about all that equity he had. He burned all that equity on June 6th. And I think the process is ongoing. We've seen it over the last few weeks with some changes to the Tour management, and we'll probably continue to see it. Thank you for your time, man.
Always a pleasure.